Welcome to Cute Widgets and More. In the previous two episodes, we've seen delegates for painting themselves. In this episode, we will turn our attention to delegates for editing. Did you know that the English language has an expression called carry coals to Newcastle? That means doing something that is not necessary. In Danish, we have to cross the river to get water. I actually like the Danish one better, and in 100 years when there's no more coal, then people will still understand the Danish one. So Danish language 1, English language 0. Okay, what I'm getting to is that I'll show you how to implement a delegate the simple way by subclassing from Q styled item delegate. Then we'll see that there is actually a mechanism to set up a factory, so we'll do that. And we'll come to the realization that that has a flaw, so I'll fix that flaw. And then I'll come to the conclusion, possibly not really needed. But there's a lot of good learning in the process and at the end of this whole thing. So do not go there just to the end. Listen through it all. But at the end of this, I'll introduce you to a delegate for combo box editing, which is, at least in my code, what most delegates do. So in this trivial example I'm going to show you, you can see I got a view up here with two columns, one for a Boolean that I can choose and another for an amount that I can choose. And well, that's not much to say about that. But let's look at the data from below and up to the view. So we start with the model. The model, simple subclass of QAbstract model. And there is not much to say. Row count, column count, data, set data and flags because I want it to be editable, obviously. And the data structure in here is just an amount and a Boolean that is stored in here. So it doesn't even support multiple rows, just this one row. The data method returns, if it's column 0, it returns the amount. And if it's column 1, it returns the Boolean. There's a bit of debate on whether you should be returning something different from string in the display role. But personally, I like doing that because my models sometimes have multiple users. One user would be the view, as we see here, but another user might be an export to LibreOffice Excel file kind of formats. And in that situation, it's nice to be able to get your hands on the data. Of course, I could do that via the edit role, but in any case, one thing that's worthwhile noticing here is that the default delegates, those that is used for the column here for false, is looking for edit role. So if I had only returned display role when I was editing, I wouldn't get a combo box for false and true here. I would just get a simple line edit, and the line edit would be a text input and it wouldn't be defaulted to the current value. So do remember the edit role. That's the model. And of course, my amount, given that I'm exporting it with from value here, the money instance needs to be QDeclare meta type. And given that my delegate is not painting, the painting will be done by the QStyled item delegates itself. So it needs to know how to go from money to a QString, and that's what our register converter up here does. Okay, so far so good. The register meta type, we'll see that in an example a bit later on. So now we got our model, we got our money, and we need to go and look at our delegate. So the delegate is subclassing from QStyled item delegate. The delegate is implementing the for method that you usually will implement if you do a editing delegate, namely create editor, which is creating the actual editor. So up here, it would be creating this editor that you see here with a combo box and a spin box. The set editor data is what goes from the model index into the editor, and set model data is going the other way when you're done editing. And then there's this optional update editor geometry, which ensures that the editor will get enough space to display itself, possibly even outside the boundary of the cell. The implementation, as you can see over here, is relatively easy. The create editor is just an instance of my money editor, and my money editor, really simple class. As you can see, it's just creating a layout with a combo box and a spin box here, a double spin box, and it has set value and value for reading the value out of and into those from a money instance. The set editor data simply get me the editor, and the editor is given in with the set editor money data, and I know that it's my editor, so I can static cast it to a queue or to a money editor instance here, and then simply set value index.data.value the money. That gets me the money instance out of my model, and that is set on the editor. Similar going the other way around, I get my editor converted there, ask it for its current value. I convert that to a Q variant, and I call set data on my model with this, and my model takes this Q variant, unpacks it, and set it into the actual instance variable there. My update geometry, you can look at that yourself. That's just to make sure that even if I make my cells really, or my rows really thin, see if I can do that, then I will get enough space. You can see it goes outside of the row. You might need a magnifying glass to see that, but it goes outside of the row here to be able to edit the data. Finally, registering this delegate with this column here. In my main, I create my model, I create my view as usual, and then here, view set item delegate for column 0. So column 0, it will use the money delegate. Column 2 and any other column, if there were more, it will use the built-in Q-styled item delegate for the editing. So while preparing this episode, I stumbled upon a class called Q Item Editor Factory. The idea was that instead of instantiating for each of the column all the places that, hey, here I want a money delegate, here I want a percentage delegate, here I want some other delegate, I would simply have my types for editing. So if the type was the money type, then it would use the money delegate. If it was a percentage type, it would use the percentage delegate. So, hey, that seems like a good promise. So I thought I will look into that, and the code coming right up. The user interface, just as before, looks like what we have up here, but the implementation is rather different. And I admit it is somewhat complex, but it is, I have a promise. I will wrap all the complexity in a Qt Widgets and More class for you in just a minute. But let's look at it. I am creating an editor factory. And this factory, I need to register my new editor with. So for that, I say I would like to have a Q standard item editor creator for my money editor. That is really truly the factory. That is a method that will, or class that will spit out an editor whenever needed. But that's cool. And then in my factory, I register this money type, or this type here. And the type, that was actually the type that I got out of registering my meta type up here. We saw that code just a little ago. I register that, and I set the default factory to be my factory, which means that anywhere in the model view framework now, whenever a view needs to instantiate something of this type, so a model returns an instance, of course wrapped in a Q variant, but an instance of money, whenever that is returned and I double click on the cell, it will instantiate a money editor, and using the properties up here for money, it will read the value using value, will set the value, and it will go for the property that has user true. So it knows that this is exactly the property to read and write, to read the data out and write the data back. No more implementing these 3 or 4 methods for creating the editor, for instantiating or for getting the data from the model into the editor and back again. It all goes via this. So I love that. That was pretty good. It's a lot of complex code, and let's see if we can do it again. This is the factory, and in the factory, I create the factory here, and I register this factory with this meta type, and I set the factory here, and whenever something needs to be done, it'll go to that and fetch that editor. Okay, I can live with the complexity, especially if it's the same all over the place. However, I'm wondering, why do I need to set a new default factory? Why not just on my original factory call that, well, sorry, my register editor here is, that's not the one. There is a method for getting the factory. Oh yeah, that's the thing. So if I go and look at my factory here, there is actually a way to get the default factory, but it returns a const. So I cannot actually modify that. I would have liked it to return a non-const version, and then I could just, on the default factory, register my type. I think that is an API fuck up. Is that okay to say in the videos? I think that's what it is. It gets worse than that, because now that I've registered my factory, let's try and edit it. Yes, goes well. I can edit the dollar amount here, so now it's $13, and edit. I can't edit that anymore. To see why? Well, I actually wanted to know why myself, so I started up that little thing that I call the debugger, and let's see what goes on here. Let's put a breakpoint at a specific method. We'll see that method right now. So the method is in the item editor factory. There is this create editor, which is what the model view will call, or the view will call on my factory to get that editor out. And it looks like this. It looks into the map here to see if there is an editor. And if not, well, that's what we are at now. Then it'll go to the default factory and get the editor out of there. And we'll go and get a pointer to the default factory. And we'll see if the default factory is equal to this being 555 whatever, default factory being 555 whatever. Wait a minute, that's myself. And of course it's myself, because up in main.cpp, I registered myself to be the default factory. So I think that somebody, when they implemented this, they thought, okay, if you have implemented a factory yourself, then, and you haven't registered the type there, then we'll just go to the default factory. But now I am the default factory. So game over, player one. What will be returned from this function? You can see if I return here, return value 0. And if I have return value 0, then no widget, then create no editor. And that's not good. So Google to the rescue. Obviously, I wasn't the only one in the whole world that had this problem. And I found the solution to be subclass from the factory and override the create editor method, which fortunately was virtual. And I took it one step further. I said, well, I really can't see a situation where in part of the world's lifetime of my application, I want one kind of money editor and sometimes I want another one. Not talking about different places in my application. I'm talking about different times that the same place would have different. So why not make it into a singleton? And that's what I did. And I actually like the code. It comes right here. So the code looks like this from a client's point of view. And you've heard me say that many times in this episode. I'm concerned when I write some APIs that they are easy to use. And this is definitely easy to use. Queue widgets and more, item editor factory, register editor. That's a static method. Even the instance or the singleton part has been hidden behind the scenes here. All I do is that I say this editor, money editor for this type here. And maybe I should just run it for you so you can see it's actually working now. Here I'm editing this one with the regular editor, and over here I'm using my own editor for editing. And let me just, so you can see the title here, it is truly the right one I am running now. Okay, let's go and look at what does this look like, this class itself. That's slightly more complex. Anyway, I'm subclassing from Queue item editor factory. And I'm overriding this create editor method. We'll see that in just a second. My register editor method, it goes and asks for the instance, the one and only. So this is a static method, goes and ask for the instance, and on the item editor factory superclass, it calls register editor. Remember, or notice that they are named the same here. So I need to go through this item editor factory : register this type and the new QStandard item editor creator T. We saw that in the previous one that I needed to write this part out myself. Okay, that's the registering. Now over to where the magic goes in. Of course, my instance method over here, that's just a regular single-cell instance, nothing cool about that. But the constructor up here, it goes and asks for the default factory. And it remembers that in m_default. And then it calls set default factory with itself. So this way, I now do remember the default factory, just like they tried in the other code to get back to the default factory. And my create editor down here, that's what the view will call to get an instance or get an editor for this particular user type. I will use the default, or the implementation that they have, namely go to the item editor factory create editor. So my superclass create the editor of that with this user type. And if we got an editor out of that, if I had register an editor, then return that. Otherwise, it would return 0. And that's when I want to go to the default editor, which I get by going to this m_default, the one that I got out of asking up here. And I'll ask that one for the editor. So a Boolean will be edited with the editor that factory is spitting out. At this stage, I was excited. I like this. I wanted to roll it out in KDAV and replace all the places where I had set delegate on this column and set delegate on this column, just to get money editors in different places. So I started, and that is when I realized that it didn't really work out for me. The problem was that my editor for money had more options. Sometimes I wanted it to be editing 2 digits after the comma. Sometimes I wanted it to be allowed to change the currencies, and sometimes not. So each and every single instance had some additional configuration. I really searched throughout my whole code base to see if there was any place that it would make sense, and unfortunately not. Maybe your code base is different, and maybe this is exactly what you need. Unfortunately, not for me. I'm sorry. I wasted your time. But the good news is that what I realized was that many places in KDAV, I just wanted a combo box for choosing different things. So choose which company, KDAV Germany, KDAV US, KDAV whatever, or choose which team, choose which, and choose one out of a set of n. So I already had created a delegate that is for editing stuff with a combo box. And let me share that with you right now. You can see the result of this part of the application up here. We have 3 columns. In the first column, I can choose a country. In the second column, I can choose a country. And in the third column, I can choose a country. The second and third column do not allow you to edit. The first column does. So USA would be Canada instead. Canada, there we are. And now we have a subsidiary in Canada, it seems. The difference between these 3, besides that this one is editable, is how I provide the variables. So the very first one is super easy. New combo box delegate. I'm just giving a string list of these items here. I'm giving it a parent, and I'm setting the delegate to be editable and setting this delegate for column 0 to be delegate 1. The second one is slightly more involving in that it's not taking a string list, but it's taking a factory. The factory, as you can see here, is just a lambda expression returning the valid values. So sometimes it might be that the valid values depend on something, but something trivial still where I didn't want to subclass. And the third way is to actually subclass the delegate class itself instead of just giving the values here. Wait a minute, Jesper, why would you want to subclass when you can do it all with that factory method? Wouldn't that be useful? Is that encapsulation? And yes, it is, but it's more than just taking that that lumped expression and putting that into a class. It's also that I would like to introduce types. The previous two, they just had strings running over, and that is usually good enough, but sometimes it's not. It's not good enough if you have already encapsulated some types. So in KDAV, I have a class called company representing the different companies, and I want not to unwrap that to just give the string Sweden, because if I do that, eventually something will go wrong and I cannot have the nice encapsulation with the company. So therefore, I want to take from my model, give a company over to the delegate, and the delegate will read that company value, unpack it, and pack it in again with setting the value. And that's why. Let's just go there and look at the code right away. Okay, the company delegate is subclassing from ComboBox delegate. It overrides this method items, which is the one to return all the items. And it implements set editor data and set model data. And if we just go over here and look at the implementation, it isn't that complex. So the items, I simply go and get all the companies, which is just all these companies here. It could, and of course in my setup, it's read from a database and blah, 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 but just hard coded here. I get all the companies. I translate each of my companies to strings. So I get my list of companies and that's it. But of course, every time I create this delegate, it will go and get that. So it's the really up-to-date value that I get out of there. And because that I get company instances from the model, whenever I call set editor data, I need to go and convert that into something that I can understand. So I go and get that company, I go and get all the companies, I figure out what index is this in all the companies, those that are displayed down here, and I set current index with this one. No looking at any strings or doing anything fancy with strings there. Going the other way, same story, I go and get all the companies and I figure out what is at the current index of my ComboBox there, and that is a company, not a string, but a real company instance, which I set in my my set data here as a variant. Let's go back and look at the ComboBox delegate. There is a few things to notice about the class itself. Not much, and I'm not going to read every single line of code for you, but there is just two things. So first of all, you saw that you could use it with three different kind of types, either subclass directly, give it a string list, or give it a factory. And the factory is just a function returning a string list. This stuff here, the usual create editor that we saw previously, it's just using the item list that we have down here. And the default implementation of this item list, it's just using, well, let's go right over here. The data here is either a string list or an item factory in a stud variant, and we're just using this overloaded. That's the code that we have here, and it needs the code up here that we are, this code here. And again, it's just a look at this place here. That's how you use variants with C++ 11 and upwards. Okay, that was the one thing. And you can see here's the different constructors. I was contemplating on using a delegating constructor, but it didn't really pay much off. So anyway, the only thing else that is worth mentioning is that, let me just run the application here. If you see here, I choose USA, and you can see down here that I got the set data right away. That is not a given. Actually, the editor will be up until you click outside usually, but that just felt wrong that I would choose UK and then it will still be editing and I needed to click somewhere else for it to commit the data. So for that reason, I went in here and in my create editor where I create my ComboBox and set editable and set the items and so on, I go down here in the non-editing version and simply take the ComboBox and say, whenever you are activated, whenever you emit the signal activated, that means you're done editing or you selected an item, which I will interpret as you are done editing. And I will call the done editing slot down here, or method, which simply emits the delegates two methods or two signals, namely one saying could you please commit the data? And the other saying, okay, close the editor. It is part of the QAbstract item view, QAbstract item delegate API. So go and look at the details there. The other situation where I was an editable one, that one caused me quite a bit of headache. And you can see there's a lot of comment here going on. What I needed to do was I needed to find inside that one, there was a QComboBox private container, and I needed to find that particular one and listen to its item selected signal. And when that happened, it goes into the slot. And using here, you're just like, what's the matter with you, Jesper? It's 2022 and you're still using that old before C++ 11 syntax here with strings. And yes, I am, because I don't know the actual class. Remember the signal slot, you can see it down here, QComboBox delegate : done editing. Well, QComboBox : activated. But I don't know the class here because that's private API. But I simply take the ComboBox and I traverse through all of its children in the parent-child setup. And by looking at the source code, I realize that there is this QComboBox private container, but I cannot use its class because I do not have access to its setup file. It's in a source file deep down there. So there I do need this old school signal slot connections. Why not just use this one down here? Well, see, the problem that I learned by debugging hard on this one was that as soon as I bring up the editor a second time, not the first time, but a second time, I will actually leave the Q line edit to bring up the ComboBox, which will mean a focus out event from the line edit, which the editor itself interprets as leave, which means that it will actually call or send out the signal activated. You could argue that's being slightly a bug light in Qt's QComboBox, but in any case, I don't get anything from declaring it a bug or not. I need something working. So for that purpose, traverse all the children, look at whether it is that particular one, then listen to its item selected, and I'm done. And that's where you can see bring up, choosing UK, and it's done, and it's emitting the right signal, or it's calling set data on the model after emitting the right signal. That's it for this tour. First over the API for implementing a editing delegate, and then through the gift shop where you got this very nice, at least in my view, ComboBox delegate. But before I leave you, let me just look at my screen and read a bit of content for you, because you gotta love this. I asked about what is the equivalent in English to bringing water or crossing the stream to get water, and I got a bunch of good ones. So obviously the right one in English is to using a sledgehammer to drag a nut. But I got a few others. In German, it's carrying owls to Athens. I don't know why they would do that. Or bring sand to the sea. And then my boss, he obviously wanted to mock me a bit, because he came out with the new one that I'll be using from now on, doing something that's just not needed. That is carrying beer to Hjørring. That's the city I live in. I'm Jesper Petersen. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Let me have your thoughts and your likes and your subscription and all of that stuff. And until next time, have a great time.